Okay, welcome everybody. I am sure that more attendees will trickle in, but in the meantime, I think we should get started. Um, Hello, welcome to the Sustainability Leaders Collaborative webinar titled EV Infrastructure 101. My name is Anita Hussey. I am a Department of Energy Fellow with the Office of Energy and Climate Change. Now, moving on to our agenda, we have a great list of panelists today. Kathy, thank you. We're going to start off with OECC Director Kathy Coons. She's going to talk about the Wisconsin Act 121, the excise tax law that you all are wondering about. Then she's going to pass it on to Rachel Turkin, who's going to talk about City of Madison and their EV fleet. And then William McMahon is going to wrap up the webinar by presenting on EV charging project considerations. And hopefully by the end of it, we'll have answered all your questions. But if not, we have a 20-minute Q&A. And then feel free to put into the Q&A as you think of them, and then we'll respond towards the end. Thank you so much. Kathy, go ahead.
Thanks, Anita. I don't know, only some of my things are working to move the slides forward. So as Anita said, I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of Act 121. This is an important change for Wisconsin. So prior to last March, when this act was enacted, in Wisconsin, non-utilities could only sell EV charging by time, not by electricity, because only utilities could sell electricity. And that's a problem because EVs charge at different rates, so it wasn't fair to charge by time. And it was also a problem because the federal funding for the EV infrastructure required states to allow chargers to charge by kWh sold. So the legislature passed a bill to fix that, which was a huge victory, very important. And in the process of that, they also set some other rules around EV charging. And it's those other rules that I think it's really important for our communities to make sure that they understand. So Act 121 was a good thing. Everyone agreed this needed to happen. It set some rules for local governments, though. And so the first thing to know is that the rules are different for chargers you install for your school or government fleet versus charging that you provide to the general public. Okay, local governments, and William is going to do an amazing job talking about how Madison is doing charging at all levels, level 1, 2, and 3 for their own fleet. But if you are going to do public charging, there are restrictions. And so the installation date matters. If you have level 1 or 2 charging that was installed before the legislation, before March 22nd, 2024, that charging has to be free to the general public if it's open to the public. As an example, at Dane County, we have charging at Lake Farm County Park, and that charging was installed a few years ago. It is free to the public. It has to stay free per the legislation. If a local government installs level 2 charging after the legislation, they have to charge a reasonable rate for that charging. Our county example is we have some public charging at our Fen Oak building where Land and Water Resources, the Parks Department is, and those chargers are for fee charger because they were installed after that date. Local governments are not allowed under the legislation to operate level 3 charging for the general public. But local governments, and that also includes school districts, can authorize a private entity to own and operate level 1, 2, or 3 charging on public property. And the rules are, of course, different for municipal utilities because those are utilities and they can sell electricity. I include a link here and we'll get you a PDF of these slides to all of the details, but that's like the framework. So the first piece is there are rules about what you can own relative to public charging and what you charge for that charging. The other set of rules in Act 121 is the legislature created a new excise tax. So, our road fund is largely funded from the gas tax. And of course, electric vehicles don't pay a gas tax. So the new excise tax of 3 cents a kilowatt hour is comparable to the gas tax. The excise tax applies to all level 3 charging and level 1 and 2 charging installed again after that legislative date, except it does not apply to private charging at residences. You know, if you are charging an EV in your garage, you don't pay that excise tax. And partly that's just a matter of it would be really difficult for the Department of Revenue to figure out and enforce something that was that dispersed. So entities have to register with the Department of Revenue. So we're going to talk a lot about installing charging infrastructure. New infrastructure you install, you have to register with the Department of Revenue and twice a year submit data and excise tax payments. There is no sales tax, and the Department of Revenue earlier this year came out with guidance on this, and it's on that link. We've also sent that out a few times in the SLC newsletter. Bottom line, what that means is if you're going to install more charging, you have to make sure you're installing charging that is smart enough to track and report the kWh delivered so that you can report that number of kWh to the Department of Revenue and then also submit the excise tax. So that's just a kind of quick foundational what are these new rules? And now I'm going to turn it over to Rachel to talk a little bit about what the City of Madison fleet has been doing in this realm.
All right, thank you, Kathy. So I'm just going to give a quick overview on what the City of Madison fleet has been doing. I have been with the city for almost 6 years, and we've been testing a lot of different sustainable fleet solutions in that time. So before I get going into all of this, I really want to chat more about this graphic right here. It shows our total carbon dioxide emissions reduced since 2018. And first to highlight is the dark green color, which tracks our emissions reductions from biodiesel and bio-based fuels. As you can see, this accounts for the majority of our reductions. That light green color in the middle is emissions reduced from hybrid and full electric vehicles. And this has been slowly ramped up as we've been able to add more of those EVs into our fleet. And that tiny sliver of gray tracks emissions from the operating out of our fleet headquarters building, which is a LEED Gold certified building. So this graphic, it manages to capture all of our efforts in one thing. You can see that we are taking lots of different pieces of the puzzle to implement greener operations. So diving into electric vehicles, there's a lot out there, and we have added many of them to our fleet. We have about 126 at this point in service. And what we've put into service range from, those light duty people movers that we all know. We have Teslas, Leafs, and a lot of Bolts. But we also have moved up to heavy duty equipment, such as 2 new electric refuse trucks and the fire engine pictured here. And as you may know, the city piloted the first ever electric fire engine put into service in North America, the Pierce Volterra. And right now we are preparing to put the first one off the production line into service. So that's very exciting. I do have a bus pictured here, but I just want to clarify that number of 126 does not include the electric buses in service with Metro Transit. So we're talking about the city's general fleet with this. So walking through our experience so far, light duty vehicles have been by far the easiest place to electrify. Of all the EVs in service, you could say 69% of them are categorized as a light duty vehicle. And if we're thinking about our light duty general fleet, 20% of that is currently an EV. And we expect that number to keep increasing as all of our assets meet the end of their life expectancy and are replaced. So the types of things we've been putting in are, loaner cars, administrative pool cars. Um, a lot of our public works supervisors are now in EVs, and we have police detectives in EVs, which has been working very well. And we're starting to test more heavy use cases with the Lightnings coming into our fleet and Silverado EVs. We've actually put a number of those into service with our park rangers. And that's going to be a really great test because they put a lot of miles on those vehicles in just a matter of 5 years even. Some of the things that we've learned as we're considering bringing an EV into the fleet is we really have to analyze the use case. Is it just a pure people mover? Is it going to need to be moving equipment around? Are you going to need it to tow things? How much does it need to tow? There's a lot of nuances here that you want to consider because it might change which EV you are looking at. You also want to consider if it is involved in emergency response in any way. And when I say that, it's not just like the police and fire response, but also weather-related emergencies or snow emergencies. Those are things that we're considering as well. And if they are, how long, like how frequently does that happen? Is it a shift-based vehicle? How long between shifts before it goes out again? These are things you want to consider in terms of your charging infrastructure. The winter range reduction is a very real thing. And for the light duty models out there, there's a lot of good data on how much you can expect your battery range to be reduced in cold weather. So definitely take a look at that and plan that into what you're looking through. And when you're going through your infrastructure planning, which William will talk a lot more about, from a fleet perspective, we want to think about where is that vehicle being parked? Is it indoors? Is it outdoors? Is that where it's going to be charged? How many EVs do we think are living with that charger? To date, we've typically planned about 2 EVs per charger at the city. But with good schedule management, and we're implementing some software to help with that, which William will talk more about, you can easily do more of that. So moving on to the heavy duty side of things, we're really just starting to test this. We have 2 Mack EVs, 1 rear loader and 1 automated side loader pictured here. And those just went into service this summer. And I also mentioned we've already tested the prototype of a fire engine, the Pierce Volterra, and we're also preparing to put a slow speed electric grinder into service. So very similar considerations, but a little bit more being learned as we go. The upfront infrastructure investment is really a big lift for these. Not only might you need to upgrade the electric infrastructure at your building, but the equipment, the charging equipment itself might take a long time to come in to be able to be installed. So planning ahead is important. The winter range reduction is also still a big piece here. And our way of tackling that and learning about it is to start slow. So we only have those 2 electric refuse trucks right now, and we're taking really good data down about what the temperature was each day, how many miles, how many carts did it pick up, what was the battery at the end of the day, how long it took to charge the next one, so that we can really start to analyze how our operations and our use are impacted on those cold weather days. And you also want to keep in mind the load capacity. These trucks are picking up a lot of stuff, and we want to make sure that those batteries can handle that too, and that that gross vehicle weight is in line. But beyond that road equipment, there's a lot of other equipment that we have been able to electrify. Electric forklifts pictured here. Almost all of our forklifts in the city are now electric. They're amazing. Our technicians really like them, but they're very quiet. We also have a few riding lawnmowers that are electric, one pictured here. We have electric sweepers and scrubbers, UTVs, and more. So when you're looking at these types of equipment that you're electrifying, the one thing that we've learned is that you really need to pay close attention to any charging and extra support infrastructure that might be needed. For example, our forklifts need a battery watering system installed as well, which is an easy enough thing to handle, but it's just one more thing to make sure that you're considering before you actually put it into use. With that, I will hand it over to William with our city engineering division.
Thank you, Rachel. So like Rachel mentioned, I'm with engineering and we do more of the infrastructure. So like fleet picks out the vehicles and then we help install the chargers and everything necessary for them. So I'll go through kind of our install process, but to start off, I want to go over the different charging station levels. So there's level 1, 2, and 3, like Kathy mentioned earlier. And level 1 is very basic, like basically something that plugs into a wall and it does very slow charging. Level 2 is kind of more what you're used to seeing, I guess, like if you see it at like a business or like a Target or something, and that charges a little faster, but it's still relatively slow compared to level 3, which is DC fast charging. And that can charge like a bolt in about an hour based on our estimates. So at the bottom here is calculations for kind of the standard level 1, 2, and 3 chargers we've used in the city. So the level 2 is a 32 amp. The level 1 is like 1.5 amps, and the level 3 is like a 60 kilowatt level 3 charger. So with the city vehicles on the left you can see that most of them we have on level 2 chargers, so they can charge in like 9 to 12 hours, so overnight. But those same vehicles would charge in about an hour to 2 hours with the level 3. And then, so level 1, like I said, you just requires a normal 120 volt AC electrical service. So it plugs into a normal wall outlet, 15 to 20 amps. They're very limited, so they're basic and they don't have much monitoring capability. And because they're so slow, we don't use them very often for city uses because we don't have 36 hours to charge a car. But they often come with the new vehicles and they're useful for if you don't have the level 2 charging infrastructure set up yet. They can kind of be a nice bridge solution. But the level 2 is what the majority of our fleet is. So these require a 208, 240 volt AC service. So this is just still a normal building service. And the power output can range from level 2. There's not like a set limit, but typically it's like 6 to 20 kilowatts. Like the one pictured in the top right is the Juicebox Pro 40, which we have a lot of. So that's a 40 amp, and that's about 7 kilowatts of charge it delivers. They can either be hardwired, so directly to a breaker on the electrical panel, or they can be on a receptacle. So what we have pictured there is a NEMA 14-50 receptacle. So it's kind of similar to a dryer plug, if you've seen one of those, except it's rated for more continuous duty. What's nice about those is you can just plug it in, and then if you get a new charger, you can plug the new charger in, and you don't have to kind of rewire it. Many level 2 chargers have monitoring solutions. It depends on the vendor and kind of how advanced you want to get with it, but they can do stuff like manage the charge schedule, limit the charge output, and then payments if it's a public charger, and access, all kind of that. And I have a slide where I'll talk more about the monitoring in a little bit. And those are usually connected through either Wi-Fi or cell connections. We haven't found many that have a hardwire, like an Ethernet data option. I know RIT would like that, but just kind of how the industry has gone seem to be that Wi-Fi or cell are the main options. And what we use level 2s for is overnight and kind of general fleet charging. So like I had in the previous slide, this will charge a bolt in like 10 hours. So that's more than enough time for most of our city uses. And then I'll get into level 3, but those are more specialty. And I'd say we only have 2 level 3 chargers right now for the city fleet. So 95% of our charging is through level 2. And then level twos can also be used for public charging, depending on the model and the software available. So level three chargers, on the right, or at the top right is a picture of the level three charger. So it's a lot bigger. It's kind of the size of a really large refrigerator. So this is one we have for the electric fire engine. So this is at Fire 8. So kind of the big thing with the level three is it requires a 480 volt AC service. So 480 volt and 208 are the two kind of standard building service sizes. But not every building is on 480. And if you need a level three charger, you might need to upgrade the electrical service. And the reason for that is because of the power output. So level twos were like 2 to 20 kilowatts, but level threes can go from 50 to 150 plus. So that picture from the Fire 8 charger is a 150 kilowatt charger. So it's a pretty big circuit breaker size, even on a 480 volt service. And then they need to be hardwired because it's such a big unit. And then additionally, some of them have depot boxes. So like that charging unit is outside, but then in the vehicle bay at the fire station, we have a depot box, which looks more like a level two, just has the plug and a couple buttons. And then that kind of allows you to put the more space consuming infrastructure outside or in a location without the vehicles where you may have more space. And then in terms of monitoring, all level threes have monitoring because they require so much power control, and then they also cost quite a bit. So the monitoring included, and then there's more connection options, but kind of the same software capabilities, usually just kind of more in depth. And the uses kind of for level three are we use it for heavy duty vehicle charging, and we don't have any yet, but we've talked in the future about doing like en route charging for certain vehicles. And these could also be used for public charging. So charger level selection. So kind of the standard process is fleet tells us what electric vehicle they have, and then we look at what charging level will be required based on its use. And we try and do level two charging as much as possible. And the main reasons for that is because of the install cost. So these are just kind of rough estimates, but for a level two charger, depending on the location, like how far from the electrical services, is it outside? Do we need to upgrade the electrical service? And then kind of how many chargers we're installing at once. We've found that it ranges from about $1,000 to $5,000 for level two chargers. And then level three chargers are 50,000 to 200,000 plus. So there's a significant difference in initial install cost there. And then there's also energy cost. So if the building's on a time of use electrical rate, which is pretty common for commercial buildings to try and save money for using energy during the non-peak times, level three charging can have a big impact on that because 150 kilowatts is a big demand charge. So this is the data from our Streets East garage, which just got those electric garbage trucks Rachel was talking about. So in about April is when we installed the level three charger and it was active and it started to get tested. So you can see that our utility bills jumped quite a bit at that point. So on like the left is 2023 and the right is 2024. And then the green is the demand and the purple is the use. So our use didn't increase that much compared to normal, but the demand charges jumped a lot. So then once we select what's level we need, we select a vendor for the juice boxes. So this has changed really recently for us. Initially in 2019, when we first started installing chargers, we installed Enolex or Juicebox kind of standard chargers. And we used them because they were relatively cheap and they were readily available. We could get them on Amazon and they were available through a lot of vendors. And they had a free software that met a lot of our initial needs. So we did that through, I'd say about 2023 is when we started to look at using another vendor potentially. And that was because we wanted to look at more fleet management and software to handle kind of our growing needs. So we had more need for access control and then load management. So try and balance it so not everything is charging at once. So we started to look at that in 2023. And then in 2024, Enolex decided to shut down business in North America. So that reduced kind of the capabilities of the current monitoring. And there was kind of there's no promise that the monitoring software would continue to be available. So we had kind of good luck with our timing where we had already completed a request for bids for a new fleet management software, and we selected OpConnect. So the downside to that was that a lot of our existing chargers were not compatible with the software, so we're in the process of upgrading most of our level 2 chargers. And then the software also has a maintenance cost, so $250 per port per year for the chargers. And that's something to keep in mind with kind of the more advanced software generally has yearly maintenance fees. And then, so we're kind of initially installing the chargers OpConnect recommended, which are light-on chargers. And then going forward, we're going to install chargers that meet OCPP 16.J certification for the protocol. So that's the open charging point protocol. And it basically is like a third-party certification that means that the software in the charger can talk to other softwares. So our goal is to install chargers that meet that protocol. So then if we do switch to a different software from OP Connect in the future, we wouldn't need to replace all our chargers like we had before. And then for level 3, we've been using ABB HVC, which is heavy duty vehicle chargers. And that was based on the charger manufacturers or the vehicle manufacturers' recommendations. Then this slide kind of goes over some of the software features. So at the top is kind of the least advanced software features, and the bottom is the most advanced. So monitoring is kind of self-explanatory. It'll track energy usage and then notification if the charger has an alarm and if it'll output that. Going more advanced is scheduling and load management. So we do a lot of scheduling for their chargers, and we try and restrict them from charging except for the lowest time of use rate. So most of our chargers won't start charging until 10 p.m. because that's when MG&E has their lowest rate, and they'll charge until 9 a.m. the next morning. So we do that all through the EV charger software. And then load management, you can restrict the output of the charger. So I'll get into why we do that in a little bit, but a lot of our chargers we have limited to half output, and that can help reduce demand charges kind of overall. Like I said, those can be a big impact on the energy bill. And then it also helps us fit more chargers, which is a code thing I'll get into a little later. Payments are kind of self-explanatory. The software will kind of handle either by app or like a screen on it, allowing the user to pay if it's a public charger and then charge at the charger. And then access control is a big one that we're looking forward to adding with OP Connect. So this restricts which vehicles can charge at the station. And instead of doing that by having a credit card, it does it through an RFID tag. So either on the key fob or on the car itself, the charger will read the RFID tag and either allow the charger to charge or not allow it to charge. So this is going to be useful for some of our chargers that are in publicly accessible locations. And then also kind of long term, it should help us estimate how much energy each agency is using, because we have a lot of electric vehicles and a lot of different agencies, and that single charger may be used for multiple agencies, but the charger itself is on like the fire station's meter, so they'd be paying for it. So it'll help with balancing cost. And then load groups are kind of a more advanced version of load management. So with that, you could attach like 10 EV chargers to one load group, and the software would manage it. So you could set like a 30 kilowatt cap. So you could have like up to 5 chargers charging at once. But if you add more, it would just reduce the charge rate of all the chargers. So this is something we haven't had a lot of experience with yet, but as we get more vehicles in our fleet, it'll help us kind of manage energy cost while still allowing everyone to plug in kind of at the end of the day and not disrupt normal use operations. And there's not like a real hard line. So the Juicebox software we had, it was kind of in the middle of load management payments about what it could do without paying for more advanced software. But I'd say generally the monitoring and scheduling, most chargers seem to have that, even if they have a free software offer. But the ones more towards the bottom, you'll likely have to pay or get a third-party software or more advanced software. In terms of installation, we install most of our chargers with in-house electricians. So that's primarily been level 2 chargers, about 50 through 2024. And like I mentioned before, we try and dedicate outlets instead of hardwiring them, just so they're easy to replace in the future. And one kind of more recent part of our level 2 installs is installing cable management, so pedestals and cable retractors. It helps with maintenance and also, more importantly, organization. The vehicle garages get kind of busy when you get more electric vehicles, and people aren't always the best about tightening up the cables, so you have cables everywhere. So we're trying to make that as automated as possible going forward. So most of our chargers we do with in-house electricians, but in other public works contracts like new buildings and building remodels, we've included EV charging. So with that, we put together a basic specification with some of the vendors we like and installation best practices. And that's handled that handles what we need for the public works contract most of the time. It hasn't been an issue. Most electricians are very familiar with installing EV chargers, and we haven't had any difficulty finding qualified installers or people interested. One other thing we've done with contractors is have EV-ready spaces. So an EV-ready space, as opposed to like the full charger and wire, we just run conduit to the location and make sure there's space on the panel. So that is just another way to future-proof things. So we can put the infrastructure in while it's easy and the building's being built or remodeled, and then come back later when we need the EV chargers. So site planning, when we get the notification from fleet that we're getting an electric vehicle, we'll look at what the use of the vehicle is to see if we need a level 2 or level 3, and then how many days it can go without charging. So like Rachel said, we aim for 2 to 1, and I'd say we're pretty good about that throughout the city. But some vehicles like the heavy duty, like the garbage trucks, need charging every day, and then police and fire, some of the other ones need charging kind of no matter what. So we have level 3 charging for those, and then those level 2 installs, we have more 1-to-1 for those vehicles. Electrical service limitations, I think, are the biggest kind of factor, kind of the first starting point. So level 2 chargers require a 50 amp circuit for like the 40 amp that we normally use. And if you want to use like level 2 chargers can go up to 80 amps of output, and that requires a 100 amp charger. And that can be a lot for older buildings. We have a lot of buildings with 600 or 800 amp services. So as you can imagine, adding a bunch of 50 amp circuit breakers or 100 amp circuit breaker can put a lot of stress on that. And then level 3 chargers require 480 volt service. So like for the fire station, we had to upgrade the entire building service for that charger. Electrical service upgrades can add cost to the project, and also lead time can be a big issue because electrical lead times have got really bad kind of since the pandemic. So like Rachel mentioned, it's important to kind of get an idea of when we need the chargers so we can get that process started and not get the vehicle to show up without the capacity to actually charge it. And then forward thinking. So we try and install panels that are bigger than kind of the current charging needs so we can add more in the future. And then also run larger conduits, because if you're going to trench or do a bore and going a long distance, it's always better to have extra capacity in the future. Some quick code and kind of plan review issues we've run into. The National Electrical Code has an article about electric vehicle charging systems. So most of it's pretty straightforward. One specific that I wanted to highlight is section 625.42 allows the rating of the charger breaker to be based on the maximum improvement by a load management system. So basically what that means is that you can size the electrical panel for what the software is going to limit the output to. So like with our 40 amp chargers, which have a 50 amp breaker, we could limit it to half and then get by with the 25 amp breaker. And basically we can fit double the amount of chargers on that panel. So we've done that for buildings where we have limited capacity to fit more chargers. And then the National Electrical Code also has ventilation requirements, but they're typically below what is required for mechanical code for garages. So that hasn't been a big issue for us on our projects. Sprinkler requirements are kind of a new area. Electric vehicles are considered batteries by the NFPA, who controls the sprinkler code. So depending on how many electric vehicles you have in the location, you may need to install additional sprinkler capacity. This part of the code is still developing. I know our metro building was remodeled and they had to up the capacity of all the sprinkler heads, but that's kind of a more in-depth code requirement and hasn't affected most of our small light-duty vehicles. Then one final thing I wanted to mention is depending on the authority having jurisdiction, you might have zoning or site plan review stuff if you have outdoor equipment, which we've had for a couple of our projects. Then I have kind of two quick installation examples. So this is installation at our police training facility that we installed last year. So this is for 10 chargers total, 2 per pedestal. And this was about 200 feet from the building. So we had a trench, which you can see the rocks there, out there. So it'll be 10 chargers we have the capacity for right now. And then the panel and then the trench was sized for an additional 10 future chargers. So trying to be as future-proof as possible since it took a lot of effort to get the electricity out there. Then the second example is the city county building garage, which is where we installed our first EV chargers. So this goes back to that code, that exception I mentioned. So we have a 250 amp panel and then we have 11 50 amp breakers on it. So it's more than typically the capacity would be, but because we have that load management system, all of these chargers are limited to half output because that's still enough to charge a bolt, which is most of the things parked here overnight. So we installed the 250 amp panel, but we only had a few chargers to start. Kind of through 2024, we've got the other 11. So another instance of trying to plan for the future when we do our installs. And then, like Kathy mentioned earlier, we're doing the exercise law tracking through our software. And then since the level 1 chargers don't really have a monitoring option, we're planning to only use level 2s and 3s going forward, which isn't that big of a deal for us because we don't use much level 1 charging because of its limited output. And then in terms of other data collection besides what's used for the excise tax, we want to try and use the RFID tags and the OP Connect software to kind of estimate mileage and engine hours for the vehicles. So we had an existing, with our gas system, there's a tag for each vehicle and it records mileage when they fill up the tank. So this would be something kind of similar where the RFID tag would identify the electric vehicle for the charger, and then using an estimate of kilowatt hours per mile, we would be able to keep track of the vehicle total mileage for maintenance intervals. And then kind of a future thing, we haven't done too much with it yet, is using the charging data in combination with the other metrics that fleet collects, like drive duration telemetric, to get a better true cost of ownership. So this hasn't really been implemented yet because we're still moving on to the OpConnect software, but I think in the next couple of years we'll have a lot more information and data to share. And then publicly available chargers, the city doesn't have any publicly available chargers at this time. So as Kathy mentioned, there's the state law passed. And because our attorney's office because the reasonable fee and some of the other details haven't been quite ironed out yet, we're waiting for more information before we look at public charging. Yeah, there hasn't been, I guess, long term, we would like to provide public charging at certain facilities, but it isn't the highest priority for our EV charging right now. We do have a couple vehicles in publicly accessible areas. So like that police training picture I was showing earlier, that is just a normal parking lot. There's no gate or anything. So the current system is we put signage up that's reserved for city spaces. But if a car did come up, there's nothing in the charger itself right now to stop it from charging. So long term, that'll be controlled by RFID tags with the OpConnect software. So if a random civilian vehicle went up, there wouldn't be an RFID tag and it wouldn't be able to charge. So that one stops someone from parking in the spot still. So we'll still have the signage up, but it'll help avoid people charging on the chargers themselves. And then rebates, incentives. There is a rebate in the Inflation Reduction Act for install of electric vehicle chargers. So it's limited by location. So this is from the DOE's website for Dane County. So any area that's colored in qualifies for the rebate. So most areas outside of Madison do. And that's based on a lot of economic indicators. And I think the like blue turquoise is for rural, which justifies most of that. So that incentive is only for 6% of the equipment cost, but that can get multiplied by 5 up to 30% if the install meets prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. And then there's no focus on energy incentives for EV chargers at this time, but some electric utilities have incentives or special rates. So I know MG&E has stuff on their website that encourages you to. Our level 3 chargers, MG&E actually paid for both of those because well, they get obviously the higher electric use rates out of it, but they're also trying to support EV charging. So there's not a lot of incentives, but I would check with the electric utility. They're probably your best bet. Then the last thing I want to talk about was charger maintenance, because that's something we've learned a lot about in the past 5 years with our chargers. So they don't require a lot of scheduled maintenance. There's not a lot of moving parts to them. So it's mainly cleaning the charger and plug and making sure they're in good condition. One thing is goes back to the cable management, is one particular issue we had one time was that the charger cable had been pulled so hard that it disconnected inside the charger, which was hard to figure out at first. But we're hoping with the cables not being on the ground and then having the retractor, they'll be put under less wear and tear. That'll be less of an issue. Our monitoring softwares can send alarms from the unit. So when the unit knows it's not working correctly, it can send it out. So that is useful if the software has that ability. And then our biggest maintenance thing is just been educating people on how the chargers work and also how time of use works. Because we got a lot of complaints initially that the chargers weren't working because they plug them at the end of the day and see that the lights weren't on. But like I mentioned before, almost all of our chargers are on time of use schedules. So it's more of a matter of if the charger was working, it just wasn't going to start charging until 10 o'clock. So education has been the best solution to that maintenance issue going forward. We've also started to attach a tag, which is what I have on the right, is we laminate it and attach it to the EV chargers themselves. And that goes over kind of for our standard models, what the LEDs mean, and then explain a little bit of the time use schedule and then give a phone number to call. So if people do have questions, they can hopefully try and answer it themselves with the little cheat sheet, or they can call us directly. And overall, they've been very low maintenance. Has not been a big issue for us with the 50 plus EV chargers we have. And that's all I have for the EV charger install portion. So I think I'll give it back to Kathy and Nida for questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, William, for your presentation, and thank you to all of our speakers. I hope you all found their presentations very informative. Now is the time for questions. And sorry, before I go ahead with questions, their contact information is on this page. So if you do have specific questions regarding what you heard, feel free to reach out to our presenters today. Their emails are on the screen. But regarding the questions, there's a couple ways you can ask your questions. You can raise your hand. We're not a very large group, so you can just come off mute, and then I'll enable you to speak. You can utilize either the chat or the Q&A function to ask your questions. As you think about those, I have a question from Kelly that I will read out loud, unless you want to come off mute, Kelly. Chris, I'll get to you after I read this question. Has Madison had your fleet garage assessed for sprinkler requirements? Our inspector required us to upgrade our sprinklers to install charging and store EVs, and the upgrade will cost us about $60,000 for 2 buildings. Do you know when formal code will go into effect?
I can just start by saying our facility is newly built, so I don't know if there were extra sprinkler requirements that we went through when we opened our facility on Nakusa Trail. I'm assuming that there probably was. And we have not had our other garages that are in our satellite locations are much smaller. So that hasn't come up for us at all. I don't know if William has any information about anything else with sprinkler code, but
Yeah, I don't have too much more. It hasn't come up with our EV, at least the electrical permits for EV installs we've done. I know Metro, because they had so many buses, I think that triggered it with that new building review, because that building was built in the last 2 years. So I don't personally have more information, but I can reach out to some people about what was involved with that.
Thank you, Kelly. Chris, you are allowed to speak. Go ahead and ask your question.
I've worked with other organizations that have received this grant that are putting in many sites of public charging. Is there a plan for Dane County to do that? I didn't hear that in the presentation.
Yeah, I think that one's for me. So you're right, Chris, we didn't talk about today. Dane County, in the last year received a Charge Up Dane County grant, similar to the funding that the state got for fast EV charging. We got funding to install EV charging in areas of the county not likely to be served by the private market. And so that initiative is just getting underway to plan where those chargers are going to go. That in about a month and a half, there will be like probably a bigger announcement where we start to look at where those locations are and doing public outreach about that. But so the impetus for this particular workshop, and this is just a good thing for us to remember to say, I should have said this up front. This webinar really came from some of our local governments having questions and us realizing that with Madison's experience installing EV infrastructure for their own fleet, that we could provide some good kind of background information there. So this is kind of focused on that piece, but there will be more coming about community public charging in the next couple months, I would say. I'm not seeing another question, so since I'm talking, I'm going to ask one. I have a question for Rachel. Rachel, I love what you're doing to try to understand with those heavy use vehicles, sort of what affects that winter range. And I'm wondering if you're also tracking who the driver is. I have this theory, and it's sort of tied to our county. I keep struggling with how do we help drivers be smarter about winter range in an EV? And I don't have any answers yet. And I'm wondering if you're thinking about stuff in that space too.
Yeah, that's a great point. We are tracking drivers, which driver is in each of those vehicles through GPS and just staffing schedules and things like that. And that is something that we have been focused on in terms of driver education with speed management and safe driving behaviors and things. And so it will be interesting to see if particular drivers have certain impacts. And if we can start to piece that out, if that needs to be something that we then coach all drivers on as well.
Awesome. I just think there's a terrific opportunity there, and it maybe extends to Madison Metro, that I bet they're going to find that some drivers on those electric routes do a lot better on kind of battery, just in the way, and I will own this. I've driven hybrids and now EVs for a number of years, and my husband is super good at like doing all the right things and expanding range, and I have kind of a heavy foot, and so I am less good. It's very clear to me in my own house that, oh, he can get a lot more range out of that charge than I can, because he's just more disciplined about thinking about it, especially in the winter when it really matters. I feel like I get better over time, but I still am not, a sipper in the way he is.
It's funny you say that, because my husband and I have the same experience. However, he has the heavy foot.
It's a very common thing in couples with these vehicles, that one of them is better at the range than the other. Who else has a question for us?
Kelly has a question for us. She's asking, do you have any future plans for charging levels / layout for police patrol vehicles once those vehicles are available and rated for patrol? Will you provide level 3 police fast charging?
So we're still in the exploratory phase for police vehicles. As I mentioned, we have detective vehicles that are electric. The Mustang Mach-E is the big one that has worked well with us so far. But for patrol vehicles, our department really wants to focus on police pursuit rated vehicles. And the only one that we know of right now is the Chevy Blazer EV, which we just haven't been able to test yet. So we're dipping our toes in. Our plan is to try to get a demo on that and figure that out. But we need to work really closely with our police department on what that kind of a phase out would be for rolling that in. And then we are working very closely with Williams' crew in the engineering division to start prepping that for future use. We know it's going to come. So we're looking at each precinct basically, and William, jump in as soon as you want, but thinking through like in phases, how can we plan that upgrade at that building? And I think we're looking at one police department right now, and the plan is to do a lot of prep work for future EV charging service, but only installing actual like a few more in that precinct at the moment. So William, yeah, go ahead, jump in.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we just actually met this week to start talking about the Midtown police install. So we're only installing level 2 chargers right now outside, but we're kind of sizing all the conduits and the panels to hopefully fit a level 3 charger in the future if needed. So like we don't, I guess, until we get the level 3 chargers test or the level 3 the vehicles that require level 3 charging tested, we don't know, I guess, what capacity we need. We're trying to future-proof as much as possible. And then also we're in the process of designing a new police south station. So as part of that design, we're making sure the new electrical service will have the capacity for level 3 stuff. So like Rachel said, we know it's going to be coming at some point in the future, so we're trying to do as much prep work to plan for that as we can right now, within reason.
Great. If that is all you'll have in this question, I'm gonna take a question from Rose. Apologies if I missed this during the presentation, but what type of charging infrastructure are you currently using for your off-road vehicles and equipment?
For those, I think they're manufacturer specific. William, correct me if I'm wrong. But I know that I think they're equivalent to like a level 2-ish charger for the specific equipment that it is.
Yeah, so kind of in terms of installs, it's exactly the same as our level 2 kind of protocol with planning and stuff. But like Rachel said, it's really manufacturer specific. So instead of having kind of the universal plugs like electric vehicles have, they have a proprietary thing. So the chargers are more specific and not as adaptable, but in terms of capacity and install are the same as our level 2s.
Sort of the next question we have is regarding hydrogen. So Kelly's asking, what do you think about the future of hydrogen versus electric for light duty vehicles? I hear this question a lot from fleet staff. They wonder how far out that technology is. Does anybody have an answer for that?
I can just quickly jump in and say this is not really on Madison's radar because the technology just isn't there. And I think more importantly, the infrastructure just, that's going to be a big lift to support that. It's something we're keeping an eye on for sure, but For light duty vehicles, I mean, the EVs are really working pretty well. So this is where we're looking right now. Kathy, I don't know if you have more that you'd like to say.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, I think the thing I would maybe add there is that some of us local governments were at a facility near Appleton last summer where they did some piloting with hydrogen fuel, and the people doing the piloting were like, this is 5 to 10 years out. This is not a thing that, you're talking about now using energy to make hydrogen to fuel, you've got more losses in the process of that. And they were just not, I was really struck that day that this was a vendor who had created this pilot initiative for the Bubolt's Nature Center, and they were like, no, you're not going to be driving a hydrogen vehicle in the near future. And so, yeah, that I think, it's a trick, and it's a trick for all of us that people see something on a science show or something and go, oh, that's the thing. But part of our quest and part of what Madison is doing so effectively here is they're taking the technology that's available right now and deploying it so they reduce today's emissions. They aren't like waiting for a magic thing that is sometime in the future and maybe not coming here. And so, I think Rachel's opening slide about the reductions that they've achieved is really impressive. And this is like awesome stuff. Yeah. Maybe just to close, like a few logistics, we recorded, so we will send out the recording. We will send out the slides to folks. If folks have other questions, there was our contact information. And if you've got other topics that you want us to dig into like this, let us know. Mostly, William and Rachel, this was so helpful. I really like it. Yeah, it's fun to hear all the cool things you're doing, and it's awesome to just have you walk through the details of how you're thinking about those installations, because I think it's good data for everybody else.
All right, we have like 3 more minutes. So any remaining questions, this is your chance. Although feel free to also just forward questions directly to our panelists today. Sure, they'll be happy to answer specific questions.
Just say thank you, Kathy and Anita, for inviting us to be a part of this conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to be here. All right.